Few names in Viking history evoke as much fascination and fear as Ivar the Boneless. He was a warrior, a strategist, a leader of the Great Heathen Army that reshaped England in the 9th century. He was also, according to legend, a man who could not walk, yet commanded armies, conquered kingdoms, and struck terror into the hearts of his enemies. But who was Ivar really? Was he the bloodthirsty berserker of the sagas? The cunning strategist who outwitted kings? Or perhaps a man crippled by disease, whose physical limitations forced him to develop a mind sharper than any sword? The sources are frustratingly sparse. The Vikings left no written records of their own. What we know comes from the Icelandic sagas, written centuries after the events they describe, and from the chronicles of those who feared him, the Christian monks of England and Ireland. In this documentary, we'll separate fact from legend. We'll explore the theories behind his strange nickname. We'll follow his path of conquest from the rivers of England to the coasts of Ireland. And we'll ask, what really happened to Ivar the Boneless? This is the story of one of history's most enigmatic figures. The first mystery begins with his name. Ivar hin Boneless, Ivar the Boneless. What does it mean? Scholars have debated this for centuries, and the answer is far from clear. In the Old Norse language, the word bein can mean both bone and leg. So Boneless could be translated as boneless or legless. This ambiguity has fueled endless speculation. The Icelandic sagas offer one explanation. According to the tale of Ragnar Lodbrok, Ivar's bonelessness was the result of a curse. His mother, a slog, was a seeress, a vulva with the gift of prophecy. She warned Ragnar to wait 3 nights before consummating their marriage. But Ragnar, passionate after a long separation, did not heed her words. As a result, Ivar was born with weak bones. Only cartilage was where bone should have been. Another theory suggests the nickname was a snake metaphor. Just as his brother Sigurd was known as Snake in the Eye, Ivar's bonelessness might refer to his physical flexibility and agility, moving like a serpent in battle. Some scholars have proposed a medical explanation. Ivar may have suffered from osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bone disease, a genetic condition that would have made walking difficult or impossible. Others suggest he was simply lame, perhaps the result of a childhood injury or a battle wound. But there are darker interpretations. A passage in the Ragnar Sona with a QTTR, the tale of Ragnar's sons, suggests the nickname might refer to male impotence. Ivar, according to this reading, had no lust in him, perhaps a euphemism for his inability or unwillingness to father children. Indeed, the sagas record that Ivar had no offspring. Another theory is that the nickname is a translation error. The Latin word exosus means the hated. A medieval scribe with only basic knowledge of Latin might have misinterpreted it as ex, without os, bone, thus the boneless. While linguistically possible, this theory is difficult to align with the direct translation of his name in Norse sources. There's even a theory that the nickname came from the end of his life. Irish annals record that Amar, almost certainly the same person, died in 873 of a sudden and horrible disease. Could this disease have left him crippled, perhaps even boneless in his final days? Whatever the origin, one thing is clear. The nickname did not prevent Ivar from becoming one of the most feared warriors of his age. The sagas emphasize that despite his physical condition, he was renowned for his wisdom, cunning, and mastery of strategy and tactics in battle. In 2016, a 9-foot skeleton discovered in Repton, England, was controversially suggested to be Ivar's. If accurate, this would contradict the brittle bone theory entirely. A man nearly 3 meters tall could hardly have suffered from such a condition. But more on that later. In 865, a massive Viking force landed on the shores of East Anglia. Contemporary chroniclers called it the Great Heathen Army, a coalition of warriors larger and more organized than anything England had seen before. Its leaders were the sons of Ragnar Lodbrok, Ivar, Halfdan, and Ubba. According to the sagas, their motivation was revenge. Ragnar, the legendary king, had been captured while raiding the kingdom of Northumbria and was executed by King Ella, who threw him into a pit of venomous snakes. As he died, Ragnar is said to have prophesied how the little piglets would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffers, foretelling that his sons would avenge him. But was this historically accurate? The Viking sagas were written centuries later, blending history with legend. However, the timing is suggestive. The Great Army arrived just as Ragnar's sons would have come of age, and their targets were precisely the kingdoms that had opposed their father. The army that landed was unlike any previous Viking force. Earlier raids had been hit-and-run affairs: strike quickly, grab treasure, and sail away. This army came to stay. They brought families, livestock, and supplies. They intended to conquer, not merely plunder. Ivar, despite his possible disability, emerged as the army's chief strategist. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and other sources consistently name him as a leader alongside his brothers. The sagas recount a remarkable story of Ivar's cunning. According to the tale of Ragnar's sons, when the army first arrived, Ivar did not immediately attack King Aella. Instead, he sought reconciliation. He asked Aella for only as much land as he could cover with an ox's hide and swore never to wage war against him. Aella, seeing this as a harmless request from a crippled man, agreed. But Ivar cut the ox's hide into such fine strands that he could envelop a large fortress, in some versions York, in others London, which he then claimed as his own. This clever ploy echoes the legendary story of Dido, the founder of Carthage, and may be a literary borrowing rather than historical fact. Whether true or not, the story illustrates how Ivar was perceived, a man who could defeat his enemies with wit rather than brute force. The sagas consistently portray him as the wisest and most cunning of Ragnar's sons, even if physically the weakest. The army spent the winter of 865 to 866 in East Anglia, extracting tribute and provisions from the local population. The East Anglian king, Edmund, apparently submitted without a fight, providing the Vikings with horses and supplies, a decision that would later cost him dearly. By the following year, the army was ready to strike. Their target, Northumbria, where King Aella ruled, the man responsible for their father's death. In 866, the Great Army marched north and captured York, the capital of Northumbria. York was not just a city, it was the heart of the kingdom, a former Roman fortress, and a major center of trade and religion. The timing was perfect. Northumbria was in chaos, torn apart by a civil war between two rival kings, Aella, who had killed Ragnar, and Osbert, whom Aella had deposed. While they fought each other, the Vikings struck. The Northumbrians, realizing the threat, finally united. In March 867, the combined forces of Aella and Osbert marched on York, determined to retake the city. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the assault initially went well. The Northumbrians broke through the city's defenses and entered York. But the Vikings had prepared a trap. Fighting in the narrow streets, the Northumbrians became disorganized. The Vikings counterattacked with ferocity, and the tide turned. Both Aella and Osbert were killed. With their deaths, organized resistance in Northumbria collapsed. The Vikings had won their first kingdom. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records the battle with characteristic brevity, and there the Northumbrians were some slain, some without. They were defeated by the heathens, and the two kings were slain. According to legend, Aella did not simply die in battle. He was captured alive and executed by Ivar and his brothers using the blood eagle, one of the most gruesome rituals in Viking lore. The procedure, if it actually existed, was horrific. The victim's ribs were cut from the spine with a sharp blade, then broken and pulled outward to form the shape of bloody wings. The lungs were then pulled out through the wounds and draped over the shoulders. Finally, salt was sprinkled over the exposed flesh while the victim, still alive, screamed in agony. Scholars debate whether the blood eagle was a real practice or a literary invention. The sagas describe it in detail, but contemporary accounts of Viking violence, though brutal, never mention such a ritual. Some historians argue that it was a later Christian invention designed to portray Vikings as savages. Others suggest that the stories were metaphorical, a poetic way of describing a particularly vicious killing. The name itself, blood eagle, appears in skaldic poetry, but whether it referred to an actual execution method or was simply a kinning for killing in battle remains unclear. For the Vikings, however, the legend served its purpose. Whether or not the blood eagle was real, the story of Attila's death cemented Ivar's reputation as a man who would stop at nothing to avenge his father. Fear was a weapon, and Ivar wielded it expertly. After the victory, Ivar installed a puppet ruler, Egbert, on the Northumbrian throne. The Vikings now controlled York and its surrounding territory, but they were far from finished. With Northumbria secured, Ivar turned his attention south. In 867, the Great Army moved into Mercia, one of the most powerful Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. They captured Nottingham, a strategically important town, and prepared to winter there. King Burgred of Mercia, faced with this threat, did what any sensible ruler would do. He called for help. His ally was Wessex, the only remaining Anglo-Saxon kingdom not yet conquered by the Vikings. King Athelred of Wessex, accompanied by his younger brother Alfred, the future Alfred the Great, marched north with an army. The combined Mercian and West Saxon forces laid siege to Nottingham, but the Vikings held the town, and the Anglo-Saxons could not dislodge them. After weeks of stalemate, a truce was negotiated. The Vikings would withdraw to York, and in return, the Mercians would not attack them. This was not a Viking defeat. They had secured peace on favorable terms, kept their army intact, and could return to York to rest and resupply. Meanwhile, the Mercians had failed to expel them, and the Vikings remained a threat. Ivar's strategy was becoming clear. He did not need to conquer all of England immediately. He could pick off the kingdoms one by one, using truces and treaties to buy time while consolidating his gains. It was patient, methodical warfare, the kind that wins wars, not just battles. The army remained in York for over a year, gathering strength and waiting for the right moment to strike again. This pause in campaigning tells us something important about Ivar's leadership. He was not reckless. He understood the value of patience, of letting his enemies weaken themselves while his own forces grew stronger. During this time, Ivar appears to have consolidated his control over the Viking forces. While his brothers are mentioned in the sources, Ivar is consistently named as the chief strategist. The Irish annals, which provide some of the most reliable contemporary accounts, refer to him as King of the Norsemen of all Ireland and Britain, a title suggesting he had achieved supremacy among the Viking leaders. The year 868 passed without major campaigns. The army trained, raided locally, and prepared for the next phase of conquest. Meanwhile, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms watched and waited, knowing that the storm would eventually return. When it did, it would strike a kingdom that had, until now, avoided the worst of the Viking onslaught, East Anglia. The army remained in York for over a year, gathering strength and waiting for the right moment to strike again. This pause in campaigning tells us something important about Ivar's leadership. He was not reckless. He understood the value of patience, of letting his enemies weaken themselves while his own forces grew stronger. During this time, Ivar appears to have consolidated his control over the Viking forces. While his brothers are mentioned in the sources, Ivar is consistently named as the chief strategist. The Irish annals, which provide some of the most reliable contemporary accounts, refer to him as King of the Norsemen of all Ireland and Britain, a title suggesting he had achieved supremacy among the Viking leaders. The year 868 passed without major campaigns. The army trained, raided locally, and prepared for the next phase of conquest. Meanwhile, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms watched and waited, knowing that the storm would eventually return. When it did, it would strike a kingdom that had, until now, avoided the worst of the Viking onslaught, East Anglia. After the execution of Edmund, Ivar vanishes from English sources. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and other English records ceased to mention him after 870. What happened to him? The most likely explanation is that he left England, turning his attention to other lands. While his brother Halfdan continued the campaign against Wessex, Ivar seems to have sailed west to the Irish Sea and Scotland. But there is another possibility. Some historians identify Ivar with Imar, a Viking king recorded in Irish annals. Imar had been active in Ireland since the 850s, raiding and forming alliances with Irish kings. He reappears in Irish records in 870, after a mysterious absence, precisely the period when Ivar was active in England. This identification is not certain, but it is compelling. If Ivar and Imar were the same man, then the leader of the Great Army was not merely a conqueror of England. He was a pan-Viking warlord who dominated the entire Irish Sea region. Whether he left England or simply faded from the chronicles, Ivar's work was done. He had achieved what no Viking before him had accomplished: the conquest of multiple Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and the establishment of a permanent Viking presence in England. In Ireland, Ivar, or Imar, had been active since at least the 850s. He formed a powerful alliance with Olaf the White, another Viking leader who ruled Dublin. Together, they dominated the Irish Sea. The Irish annals describe them raiding deep into Ireland, plundering monasteries, and fighting against Irish kings. In 857, they defeated an army led by Cadel the Fair. In 859, they allied with Cerbal, king of Ossory, one of the most powerful Irish rulers of the time. But their greatest achievement came in 870. That year, Ivar and Olaf launched a massive campaign against Dumbarton, the capital of the Britons of Strathclyde. Dumbarton Rock was a formidable fortress, perched on a volcanic plug overlooking the River Clyde. It had withstood sieges for centuries. The Vikings besieged it for 4 months. They cut off all supplies, waiting for hunger to do its work. Finally, the defenders surrendered. The Vikings sacked the fortress, destroyed it completely, and returned to Dublin with hundreds of prisoners, Britons, Picts, and Anglo-Saxons, to be sold as slaves. The victory at Dumbarton cemented Ivar's status. By 871, the Irish annals refer to him as King of the Norsemen of all Ireland and Britain. This was no empty title. He controlled Dublin, had conquered Northumbria, and had humbled the Britons of Strathclyde. No Viking before him had wielded such power. Ivar settled in Dublin, making it his base for the remainder of his career. The city, founded by Vikings decades earlier, had grown into a major trading hub. From Dublin, Ivar could control the Irish Sea, dominate the surrounding kingdoms, and project power across the region. But his time was running out. In 873, the Annals of Ulster record his death. Imhar, king of the Norsemen of all Ireland and Britain, ended his life. The cause of death is not specified, but the fragmentary annals of Ireland add a grim detail. He died of a sudden and horrible disease. It is a fittingly mysterious end for a man whose life was shrouded in mystery. After decades of conquest, after reshaping the politics of 2 islands, Ivar the Boneless finally succumbed to something no strategy could defeat: death itself. After Ivar's death, his legend only grew. The sagas, written centuries later, transformed him into a figure of almost mythical proportions. But there may be a physical trace of the real Ivar, hidden beneath an English churchyard. In 1686, a farm laborer named Thomas Walker made a remarkable discovery in the village of Repton, Derbyshire. He unearthed a large burial mound containing a stone coffin with a skeleton over 9 feet long. Surrounding it were at least 249 other skeletons, all arranged with their feet pointing toward the central coffin. The burial was clearly that of someone immensely important. Repton was where the Great Army wintered in 873 to 874, the same year Ivar died. Could this be his final resting place? The skeleton was later lost, but descriptions of it survive. It was said to be enormous, far taller than any Viking yet discovered. If accurate, this would contradict the theory that Ivar suffered from brittle bone disease, which typically causes short stature and deformed limbs. Modern excavations at Repton have uncovered a massive Viking camp and numerous burials. Some of the skeletons show signs of violent death. The evidence suggests that Repton was a major Viking site, perhaps even the burial place of a king. Whether Ivar lies at Repton or not, his legacy endured. If he is the same as Imar, he founded the Ui and Mare dynasty, a family that dominated the Irish Sea region for centuries. His descendants, known as the Kings of Dublin and the Kings of York, continued to rule parts of Ireland and England long after his death. In popular culture, Ivar has experienced a renaissance. The History Channel series Vikings portrayed him as a complex, charismatic figure, brilliantly played by Alex Hogg Anderson. Games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla and Crusader Kings 3 feature him as a playable character, introducing new generations to his legend. But the real Ivar, the historical figure, remains elusive. We know he existed. We know he conquered. We know he terrified his enemies. But the details of his life are shrouded in the mists of time, obscured by saga and legend. Perhaps that's fitting. Ivar the Boneless was a man of mystery in life, and he remains one in death. His nickname, his disability, his achievements, his burial, all are subjects of debate. All we can do is piece together the fragments and wonder. What we do know is this: he was one of the most successful Viking leaders in history. He reshaped the political map of Britain. He established dynasties that lasted for generations. And he left a legacy of fear, respect, and enduring fascination. The mystery of Ivar the Boneless endures, and perhaps that's exactly how he would have wanted it. Ivar the Boneless was many things: a conqueror, a strategist, a legend. He was also, in all likelihood, a man who lived with pain and limitation, yet overcame them to achieve greatness. His story reminds us that history is never simple. The sources contradict each other. The legends blur into fact. We will probably never know the full truth about Ivar, why he was called boneless, how he really fought, where he truly died. But perhaps that's the point. Ivar belongs to the realm of myth as much as history. He is a figure who transcends his time, becoming a symbol of cunning, determination, and the indomitable human spirit. The Vikings called such men Drengr, a word that means both warrior and hero. Ivar was both. If you enjoyed this exploration of Ivar the Boneless, please subscribe to Echoes of History. In our next video, we'll delve into another legendary figure, Bjorn Ironside, the Viking who may have sacked Rome. Thank you for listening.